Darlantia, Book 1, by Michael Gardner. Read by Michael Gardner. Prologue. Once there were 10 of them, but now only 4 remained. 10 wizards of great influence and ambition were drawn together, not out of friendship, but of a desire for knowledge and power. Over the years they had banded together, having heard tales and exploits of one another, and once together they had spent years researching and theorizing all the legends and myths of the world, anything that had potential to expand their own magical abilities and talents. It had taken a long time, but together they concluded that there existed 4 extremely powerful sources of magic in the world, the magical embodiments of earth, water, fire, and air. If the stories were true, then these elemental sources were said to be some of the most powerful magic entities in the world. Naturally, these 10 men set out to capture this powerful magic for themselves. At the top of a desolate plateau in the frozen south, where 2 of their number died, they discovered air. In a hot dusty canyon, bigger than many cities, where a further 3 of their number died, they discovered earth. In a vast network of caves located around a vast ring of tropical islands, where yet again one of their numbers succumbed, they discovered water. Now, the remaining survivors needed only to capture fire in order to complete their ambitious goals. Once there were 10, but now there were 4. Clavius stood behind his 3 companions. The 4 were the only survivors of the incredible and brutal fights against the magical entities of air, earth, and water. Perhaps that meant they were the 4 most powerful. Clavius was, of course, confident of his own magical ability, but regarded his companions as lucky rather than anything else. Despite the huge loss, their efforts had so far paid off. The elements of water, earth, and air hung above their heads, encapsulated in murky white spheres. Together, the original 10 had crafted the spell themselves, an extremely complicated affair, but one that yielded amazing results. The spell quite simply trapped the elements inside the sphere, and then, quite cleverly, used their own power against them. The more they struggled, the stronger the protective barrier became. The elements, in the process, were rendered useless, but everyone had agreed that they would devise a way to harness the power once all 4 had been obtained. Clavius, however, had been devising a way to do just that for years himself. He had kept that a secret from everybody else. He expected the other survivors all had their own schemes as well, but it was entirely possible that none of them would see the light of day again, and so it bothered him little at this point. Instead, his mind was focused on the here and now. Together, they had tracked the fire element to a lone volcano, located far away from any civilized kingdoms or civilizations. The volcano wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but on one side of it they had discovered a circular tunnel that supposedly led to its heart. Their detection spells confirmed that something extremely powerful and extremely magical lay at the other end. The tunnel was only wide enough to move single file. All 4 of them slowly made their way downwards. At the front, wielding a beam of white light from his bronze staff, was Kaldan, a wizard in his late 40s, with thick, dark beard and even darker eyes. Kaldan was the sort of person who simply got on with things, and he rarely spoke unless it was something he considered urgent or important. After him was Jovis. At 27 years old, he was the youngest of the group. He was very handsome and charming, with a set of striking blue eyes, a clean-shaven face, and a mop of flowing blonde hair. At first, Jovis had been very energetic and enthusiastic, but each battle with the elements had dampened his enthusiasm far more than it had the others. Following Jovis was Lupus. At 66 years of age, he was by far the oldest, but with age came experience, and his knowledge of magic outshined the rest of them by miles. He was slightly, but noticeably, hunched over, with a long soft beard of light grey. It was Lupus who was responsible for bringing the 10 wizards together in the first place, and each death had made him more angry and bitter. Now he never seemed to stop complaining. All 4 of them wore simple robes and cloaks, as they had very little use for anything more extravagant. Clavius was at the back of the group, using simple telekinesis to keep the 3 spheres containing the elements hovering along at the steady pace of the 4 wizards. Clavius was 30, and there was nothing particularly outstanding about his appearance. Like Jovis, he liked to keep his face clean-shaven, and he kept his brown hair short. His robes were dark grey trimmed with silver. He looked down at them now and touched the embroidery on the left of his chest. It was of a sailing ship. His family for generations were the owners of a company that traded goods all over the known world. The family had it all, and by being born into it, he never suffered, and he got everything he wanted throughout his childhood. He was content with this life until at the age of 15 he discovered, purely by chance, that he could wield magic. After that moment, he was no longer content to be the spoiled son of a wealthy family, and had used his family's influence and wealth to buy books, scrolls, and teachers, so that he could push his magic abilities to the very limit. By the age of 20, he was a local celebrity, but it took another 5 years before Lupus would discover him, and another year again to prove that he was worthy to join the troop of wizards Lupus had assembled. At that point, there had only been 4 others. Touching the embroidery sewn by his mother now, he couldn't help but briefly ponder what his life would be like had he not been born with the ability to wield magic. It was at that point he noticed a strange flashing. He looked up at the elements and saw that each sphere had become a churning maelstrom of angry energy. They must be close. Up ahead, Caladan said, slightly turning his head to the others. Jovis, Lupus, and Clavius all stopped behind him and peered down the tunnel. Caladan had ceased the illuminating light from his staff so that the others could better see. Down at the bottom of the passage there was a fierce, golden glow of light, and it had also become noticeably hotter. "This must be it," Jovis said, voice trembling slightly. He pulled out his light brown wand from his robes. "The elements are going crazy," Clavius shot the orbs another look as he pulled out his own staff, a twisted, golden brown branch with a light pink crystal fixed at the end. Lupus cautiously looked back at the elements, casually floating over his head himself. They were slowly starting to drift down the tunnel towards the light. Clavius effortlessly pulled them back towards him. "Leave them here," Lupus said coldly. Clavius nodded slowly, raising an eyebrow. Like that wasn't obvious. Did Lupus really need to tell him that? He nonetheless stuck the spheres to the walls of the tunnel. "Right, we all know the plan?" Caladan asked them. They each nodded their acknowledgement. He turned back towards the light and started to yet again walk downwards. Jovis moved a little tenderly at first, but a shove from Lupus's long white staff with a crystal ball on the end set him at the same pace as Caladan. Clavius looked back at the elements, now stuck in place on the walls of the tunnel. "See you soon." Together they reached the end of the tunnel and exited into the light. Clavius's eyes widened in amazement at the sight before him. They had stepped out onto a narrow bridge of rock, which led towards a large circular platform in the middle of a lake of lava. All around them were the imposing walls of the conical shape of the volcano itself. Clavius followed the walls of the magma chamber up towards the crater. A circle of dark sky was visible above. The lava was about 60 feet below the bridge and circular island of rock, but it was still unbearably hot. A quick wave of his staff cast the most powerful heat-resistant spell Clavius knew, which cooled him considerably. He saw the others do the same, and then Caladan pressed forwards across the bridge. Jovis glanced down nervously at the lava below and followed suit. Lupus went next, with none of the hesitation. With the others in front of him, it wasn't until Clavius reached the circular platform that he could see the reason that the four of them had come all this way. Directly in the center of the platform was the fire element itself. Clavius felt his whole body react as soon as he laid his eyes upon it. At the moment, it was nothing more than a golden flame, no bigger than that of a standard fireplace, hanging in the air, and yet it still had a profound effect on him. He felt his whole body shiver at the intense magic it held. His blood and adrenaline already began to rush around his body as he prepared himself for the confrontation ahead. Clavius quickly cast several spells to help him prepare, as Jovis and Caudan did the same. Lupus remained near the bridge. As the most experienced, he would be the one performing the complicated spell that would trap the fire element like the others. It was up to Clavius, Caudan, and Jovis to keep it busy in the meantime, and hopefully not die in the process. Together, the three of them spread out over the circular platform. Caudan took the left, Jovis the middle, Clavius the right. Together, they became the three prongs of a trident. As the trio spread out further and continued to cautiously creep towards the fire element, there was a sudden eruption of chanting behind from Lupus, who raised his staff and began the entrapment spell. The fire element suddenly doubled in size and fired an arc of flaming red-hot fire over the head of Jovis towards Lupus. Thankfully, Jovis was able to react in time and cast a protective barrier in the air to block the arc of fire. In response, the fire element shot a burning cone of flame directly at Jovis. Jovis yet again cast a barrier, just in time to save himself. But unlike before, the flames continued to surge out from the element. Jovis began to be forced back towards Lupus, boots scraping against stone as he tried to resist the push. Clavius saw the protective barrier suddenly increase in strength, likely being reinforced by Caudan. Clavius decided to go on the offensive. He fired a bolt of crackling lightning from his staff directly at the fire element. The lightning shot through the golden flames and struck the side of the volcano. Rock cracked and splintered and showered into the lava below. The fire element was apparently unfazed by the attack. It shot forth a wave of fire that engulfed the entire room. Caudan, Jovis, and Clavius quickly scrambled in tandem to form a protective barrier to protect both themselves and Lupus from the wall of flames. The fire element continued as more waves of fire burst forth from it, each more intense than the last, but the three could easily hold out against such simplistic attacks. Between the waves, the others joined Clavius on the attack. Caudan fired off glowing blue magic missiles that exploded around the fire element. Jovis summoned oversized hammers and greatswords from thin air to swing and smash at the flames. Clavius used his powerful telekinesis to cause the rock around the element to rise up in violent spikes to strike and trap the fire in place. After this swift attack, the waves of flame subsided. Clavius watched with bated breath as the dust cleared from their attacks. It had done nothing. The fire element rose up from the platform and began to burn so brightly that Clavius had to shield his eyes. Suddenly, it felt as if the element was drawing power from around the volcano. Flames began to swell violently around it, quickly becoming a maelstrom of fiery energy, the air around it shimmering and rippling from the intense heat. Despite the cooling spell, Clavius could feel the sweat forming on his brow. After a few seconds, large demonic wings emerged from the maelstrom, followed by arms, legs, and a long tail. There was an explosion of energy, and Clavius was thrown to the edge of the platform. A glance down, and to his horror, he could see that the level of the lava below was slowly but surely rising. Pulling himself back to his feet, and to the immediate task at hand, he saw that the fire element had taken the shape of a fiery demon. Large glowing horns had sprouted forth from its head, and its newly formed mouth and eyes burned hot like a furnace. The rest of the demon itself was a mixture of ash, smoke, molten coals and flames. that towered above the wizards considerably. Jovis and Cáldan were already throwing everything they had at it, to little effect. The fiery demon swiftly moved towards them, its footprints melting the very rock beneath it as it came. Clavius took this opportunity to get behind the beast as it began to strike at his companions with flaming claws and blades formed out of pure fire. Clavius conjured all the power he could and fired a bolt of lightning at the demon's head. It struck its mark. There was an explosion of ash and smoke. Clavius wasted no time in pressing the attack. He pointed his staff upwards and pulled down rocks from the walls of the volcano, showering the demon in an avalanche of rock. Dust, smoke and ash flew up in all directions from the impact. He breathed a heavy sigh of relief. It was premature. There was a scraping of rocks from the pile for a moment, and then there was movement. Emerging from the rubble was now a series of smaller demons, formed of flames. They were accompanied by fiery creatures that had taken the shape of various animals, such as deer, birds, and even creatures Clavius didn't recognize. The small demons, about 6 in number, pounced upon a dazed Cáldan. They slashed at him with flaming swords as he struggled against the onslaught. Clavius moved to reinforce the overwhelmed wizard, but was instead set upon by the flaming animals. The flyers swooped in gracefully at him, the terrestrial ones charged at him, and he had to quickly bring up his staff in defense. It took some powerful strikes, but soon each and every one of them that came at him had dissipated. They had got him in places though, and he would need a second to heal himself. Setting about with the spells, Clavius took the opportunity to size up the situation. Looking around the volcano, he could tell the lava was not far from reaching the circular platform, and even worse, rock was beginning to fall from the ceiling at an alarming rate. Clavius saw that only 2 of the smaller demons were left. He could also see the burning body of Cáldan, lying lifeless on the floor. Jovis, evidently overcome with panic, had ditched his efforts to attack and was instead running towards Lupus, followed swiftly by the 2 demons and the rest of the fire animals. His healing complete, Clavius launched himself from the platform and flew effortlessly through the air towards the center of the fire element's forces. As he landed, he struck his staff in the ground hard. A massive shockwave radiated from the impact out toward his foes. The fire elements were blown away into nothingness, and the 2 demons were thrown back to the ground. "This isn't over yet," he quickly called out to Jovis, and he was right. The 2 demons were suddenly upon him. He threw up a defensive shield to block one attack, and had to parry the flaming sword of the other demon with his staff. He cast another shockwave that launched him back again, and followed with a bolt of lightning at one that destroyed it. Almost simultaneously, the other was struck by a beam of blue light that saw it too explode into embers. He looked up to see Jovis standing just a short distance away, casting the spell. Clavius ran to regroup with him. He realized he could hear the chanting of Lupus. That meant he neared the end of the spell. Before he could gather himself further, there was an eruption of flame at the center of the platform, and the golden flames of the fire element re-emerged from the rockfall. This time, 8 swirling tentacles of golden flame erupted from the center of it. They began to violently swing around the volcano, sending yet more rocks crashing down upon them, and leaving glowing hot magma in their wake. Together, Clavius and Jovis formed a protective barrier to shield themselves from the onslaught of flame and rock. The tendrils of flame focused their efforts on the 2 wizards. The fire whipped and thrashed aggressively at the wizards. The heat was unbearable. Clavius could feel his power draining. He and Jovis had reinforced themselves with every known level of protection, but it was only a matter of time before they were both consumed, and so Clavius did what had to be done to survive. He launched himself in the air and sent himself hurtling towards Lupus. Glancing back, he saw Jovis almost instantly consumed by the fire, his agonized final screams echoing in Clavius's ears. As he landed, he could feel the hot flames coming to consume him still, but, uttering the last words of the spell, Lupus came out of his trance. As Clavius got to his feet, he could see that the roiling flame that had been at the centre of the platform was now a murky white sphere, flashing violently. "Quickly, grab it," Lupus wheezed, clutching at Clavius's shoulder. In response, Clavius held out his hand and brought the imprisoned fire element hurtling across the chamber to him. The lava was now just inches away from the lip of the platform and the bridge, and, with the avalanche of rocks filling the volcano, the only escape route was back the way they had came. As rocks continued to rain down upon them and lava bubbled dangerously close to their feet, Clavius and Lupus sped across the bridge towards the tunnel entrance. Clavius, in front, decided to seize upon the opportunity while it presented himself. He paused in front of the narrow opening. Lupus's face contorted into angry confusion. "Why you wait?" His shout was cut short by the full force of Clavius's telekinetic blast. Amazingly, though, Lupus held his ground and brought up his own staff to counterattack. Clavius struck again, hitting the old wizard on the head with the same telekinetic blast. This time, Lupus fell, stumbling back, collapsing to the ground. Clavius watched in rapt horror as the lava crept over the edge of the bridge and consumed Lupus. There was an ear-piercing scream, then he was consumed entirely. Clavius, at risk of meeting a similar fate, took the fire element telekinetically and began to run up the tunnel. He grabbed the other three as he continued up, all still stuck against the wall where he had left them. A quick look back confirmed his suspicion that the rate of the lava rising had increased exponentially, and that if he didn't hurry, he would join Lupus in the same grisly fate. He was weak, and rather than casting any spells, he focused simply on placing one foot in front of the other. Thankfully, it wasn't long before he could see the exit, but the lava was mere inches away from his heels now. Were it not for that protection spell he cast earlier, his robes would undoubtedly have caught fire by now from the proximity to the bubbling red rising behind him. Clavius forced the four elements out of the opening first, and then hurled himself out. He painfully tumbled down the slope of the volcano a little way before he hit the hard ground below, the air leaving his lungs as he impacted. Looking back in horror, he saw the lava pouring out of the opening and flowing down the slope towards him. That was when he felt familiar, powerful claws clasp him in a vice-like grip and whisk him away to safety just as the lava reached his position. With a painful thud, Clavius was set upon some rocky high ground some distance away from the danger of the erupting volcano. Getting to his feet, he looked at his saviour, his dragon companion, known as Rornstaff. The dragon was huge, maybe twice the size of a killer whale, whereas most dragons were about the size of one. His scales were black, whilst his horns, claws, and the spikes that ran along his neck, back, and tail were a dark crimson colour. His wings were a charcoal grey. The dark purple eyes gazed fiercely down at Clavius. "I see you are successful in dealing with the others," Rornstaff said, his voice calmer than one would expect from such a mighty beast. Clavius got to his feet and laughed nervously. "Aye, that I did." He looked around, checking the sky in particular. "I see you were also successful in dealing with the wyverns." Rornstaff acknowledged the death of the other wizard's flying mounts with a simple nod. Such creatures were of little threat to him. Clavius then looked at the four elements floating lazily above his head. The fire element had done most of the work, but it looked like Rornstaff and Clavius had been successful in their small betrayal. "Shall we be on our way?" Clavius turned to Rornstaff. The dragon, in response, knelt down to allow the wizard to mount the base of his neck. Clavius gathered the elements around him, and with a great flap from Rornstaff's enormous outstretched wings, they were launched into the air and away from the erupting volcano. Once there were 10, but now there was one. Thanks for listening. The full Darlantia book is available on Amazon, link in the description, and subscribe for weekly readings from the book.